Chapter 18. A few minutes after Alex walked away, Steve strode up and sat at one of the tables. He sat next to JV, so he faced his Con and Karen across the walkway between tables. Now we wait. Steve looked at JV. She looked back for a moment, then to Matt. He didn't know what to say, so he leaned against the end of one of the tables and looked around. I wish we'd brought something to eat. Rebecca dropped her head to one side, letting it rest on Nick's shoulder. Are you hungry already? JV asked. It's been less than 2 hours since we ate. I'm not starving, but I could eat, she said. Matt watched the exchange with half a smile. They chatted a little, talking about the weather and how nice it was for the next several minutes, until a minivan pulled into the parking lot where they'd left his vehicle. They watched in impatient silence as several people got out and headed toward the lake on the other side of the parking area. Not them, Rebecca said with a sigh. She shifted on the bench, obviously not comfortable. A moment later, she pushed herself to her feet. I can't just sit. I need to move, walk around some. She moved slowly and paced back and forth between the table where her mate still sat and where Steve was. Are you hurting or impatient? Steve tilted his head to one side. Rebecca stopped and looked at him, then wrinkled her nose. A little of both. She pushed one hand into her back and kept moving. How about you and I walk around little bit? JV offered, standing. We won't go far, just right here around the tables, but I think moving around will help you. Both with the nerves and the discomfort. She glanced at Steve, who nodded once, then stepped up beside Rebecca, hooked her arm with her own, and guided her a few feet away. She stayed with the Karen while they walked in slow circles around the group of tables. Matt watched as the two women made several laps, then they detoured. She needs to use the restroom. We'll be right back. JV tilted her head toward the nearby restroom. Be careful. Steve's eyes flicked to where Alex strolled between the picnic tables and parking lot. Without even a glance in their direction, Alex turned and headed for the bathroom, getting there and going inside before Rebecca and JV reached the building. While the women were still in the restroom, a small SUV made a loop through the parking lot, then came back and parked. Steve sat up a little straighter. The doors on the vehicle opened. A woman and a man got out of the front seat. From the back emerged two women and a man. They paused a moment, looking around, then headed for the picnic area where Matt, Steve, and Nick sat. As they got closer, it became apparent that the two women from the back seat were younger, probably still teenagers. The man from the back was a little older, probably not more than 25. From what he knew of Rebecca's family, this was likely them. Steve said in a low voice. I've told Jade to keep the girls in the bathroom until I give the all clear. Bobby will move around and cover from their side. The men watched the group approach without a word. Matt glanced around and noticed that Nick seemed to have clenched his jaw. He vibrated with barely concealed anger, though his face was carefully blank. What? Matt kept his voice low too, so the group approaching wouldn't hear. That bastard is her father. He wasn't supposed to be here. Nick spoke through clenched teeth. That's her dad? I knew he wasn't supposed to come, but I don't know any of them on site. Without you telling me who he is, I would never have known. This is not a good sign for how things will go here. Steve glanced at Nick as if trying to judge if he'd have to step between his con and the man approaching. We can only go from here. As long as we don't start a fight, we're in the clear. Matt murmured, careful to keep his face impassive. So make sure you don't throw the first fist. I can do that, Steve said. Not so sure about my con. They fell silent as they waited for the group to reach them. They stopped about 30 feet away, and the older man came forward alone, separating himself from the group. I'm looking for Matthew Walker. Would one of you happen to be him? His voice was deep and rumbled from his throat. He spoke like someone very sure of their position, and that he would be answered. "That's me." Matt spoke up. "Can I ask who you are?" He pretended not to know, wondering if the man would lie. "My name is Neil Sutton. I'm supposed to be meeting my daughter here." "Actually, sir, your wife and children are supposed to be meeting her. You are not supposed to be here." Matthew didn't back down an inch. "Per our negotiations with your con, it was made clear that they were to be accompanied by one person to provide security, but you were not to be in the group." "Too bad I'm here, so where's my girl?" He seemed to expect his breach of the agreement to be ignored. "Give me a moment to see if this is an irreparable breach, or if we can continue." He turned away, though not enough that Sutton was at his back, and pulled out his cell phone. He typed out a message and hit send before typing out another as a disguise while he glanced at Steve. He could feel Nick's anger and knew he wouldn't be giving a rational answer at the moment. "Do we continue or call it off?" He sent the mental communication to his brother-in-law. "We can call it off and pick up the girls on our way past the restroom, then get the hell out of Dodge, if that's what you think is best." "No, we're in a public place." He's not going to do anything too extreme, for fear of drawing too much attention. "Let's agree to the meet and have the girls come on out." Matt looked around, pretending disinterest in Nick and the man he spoke to. "But once you get them to sit down, I want you to head to the restroom and meet the girls halfway. The more people they have with them, the better I'll feel." "No problem." The phone in Matt's hand chirped. He hit the screen a few more times, then turned back the older man and gave him what he hoped was a friendly smile. "They've agreed to continue. Why don't you have a seat and get comfortable? They'll be here in just a few minutes." He waited while Neil waved the others over. They found a table not too close to where Steve and Nick still sat and waited. Unlike the others, they all sat around the table facing each other. There were no smiles, no outward signs of happiness or nerves. It struck Matt as odd. The second message he'd sent to himself arrived, making his phone chirp again. Pulling it out, he pretended to read the message. "They're almost here. I'll just go show them where we are." He looked at Neil for some acknowledgement, then turned and headed back toward the parking lot and the bathrooms in between, without giving any sign that the men at the nearby table were with him.